Hello everyone, welcome to this section. In this section, we are going to discuss vectors. So first of all, we would like to mention why vectors. Vectors are like arrays, but they are more flexible. So previously, we learned how to initialize one array. For example, here we're initializing an array. The name is numbers and it's of integer type and it has 5 elements, and we see the elements here. This is a normal array. And we learned also how to declare and initialize a dynamic array. To do that, we get the size from the user, and dynamically we are initializing one array here customized to the usage of the user. So if the user wants an array with 8 size with the size of 8, we are giving it an array with the size of 8, because this size that we are getting from the user is the size that we are making the array with. So if another user is going to use our program, they want the size of 5, we're initializing a size of 5. However, the thing is that initially we know this we need to settle down with one size for arrays. What if we initialize the array with the size of 5, and later on we realize that we would like to add one more and we would like to add another more, etc. So this way, using vectors, it's much easier. Modifications and flexibility of vectors are much better, because in arrays we cannot modify the size of an array once it is initialized. So when it is initialized, for example, this example, to have an array of size 5, later on we cannot modify its size to 7, 8, 10, etc. Also here, when one array is initialized, we cannot modify its size. However, vectors give us this permission to have one initial size for it, and dynamically after some time, if we want, we can increase its size. It's a very useful way of working with numbers, or like it's a flexible way of arrays. Vectors give us this flexibility to be able to increase the size or reduce its size as we are working with it. So if any changes required, we can do it with vectors. However, with arrays, the size are fixed. So this is why vectors are important. In this section, we are going to discuss vectors and provide different examples and exercises, practical coding exercises, to see how flexible vectors are. Thank you for watching. Hello everyone. We would like to write a program that collects and calculates the average score of students in an exam. To do that, we first declare a vector of type integer named scores, and we have one integer called score and one integer called number of students, so num students. So first we are showing the user a message saying that give me the number of students. So when it gives us the number of a student, we are going to have a for loop to read all the student numbers. So I is going to start from 0 until it is lower than the number of students. So if the user is going to say that we have 3 students, we would like to discuss 3 students. So I is going to be 0, 1, and 2. And as long as I is lower than 3, it's okay. So we will have 3 iterations from 0 to 2. And we are asking the user to give us the score of the first student, of the second student, and the third student in the first run in each iteration. So just assume that I equals 0. Now we're getting the score of the first student. So the user enters, we store it in score, and then we are pushing back this score into the scores vector. So let me type it down. So when I equals 0, getting the score of student 1. So the vector, so now we're getting the number from the user. Just imagine user enters 100. So 100 is assigned to the integer score. Then this scores vector is now push back that score integer, or let's say in the first run it is 100. Okay, and then I equals 1, getting the score of student 2. User, just imagine user enters 98, score equals 98 now, so scores vector dot pushback, it's going to push back 98, and then I equals 2, getting the score of student 3. User enters, just imagine 99, so score is now 99. This score is this score, so we're storing it here. Okay, and scores vector pushback is now 99. So basically we are pushing back 3 elements to the scores vector, and then we would like to collect the scores that we did, and we would like to calculate the average. To do that, we have one integer called sum that is initialized to 0, and we have a for loop, like we have an integer called s. It is iterating over all the elements of the scores vector. Okay, and then it is going to add all the elements to this of this vector to each other. So sum plus equal s, this simply means sum equals sum plus s. Okay, so sum initially is 0, so when in the first iteration we have sum equals 0 plus the first number, which is 100. Then in the second iteration we have sum equal, so from the previous run we had the sum equal 100, now it is 100 plus the second score, which is 98, sorry, this is what we imagined that the user mentioned. And in the third iteration, because there are only 3 elements in the vector, so there will be only 3 iteration. So sum equals 198, which is from the output of the previous run, plus 99. Okay, so when we do the math, it should be equal to 297. And then when this for loop is finished, so we have calculated the sum of the scores, which is 297. Then we have a double initialized here called average, and it is typecasting the value of the sum to be a double rather than an integer. So because we want to divide it to the size of the vector, and it may have some decimals. So we typecast the sum to a double from int, and then it is divided by the size of the vector, which is the total number of students. So it could also be divided to this num students, because this is exactly the number of students equals the size of the vector. So then we are printing the average. Let me run. So basically it says enter the number of students. We are here. I will write 3. So it says that it enters this part, and it is saying that enter the score for the first student 0. We have here I plus 1 because it's the first student having the index 0. We don't want to show the student 0 here. We would like to show student 1. So I plus 1 showing that the index plus 1, 0 plus 1. So because it starts from 0. So the first student, we say 100. And then it says the second student, I would say 98. The third student, I would say 99. And it says the average is 99. So we are calculating the sum here and then the average here. It's a very basic example. It's a very good coding exercise, however, because it reviews many things in this small example. We reviewed typecasting, we reviewed a for loop and using the summation to have all the elements of a vector. We reviewed how to iterate over a vector, and we reviewed the pushback uh, syntax function for the vectors here. Thank you for watching. Hello everyone, welcome to this lecture. In today's video, we would like to write a program to input numbers into a vector and display them. Here, I'm having my main function. I'm initializing a vector of integer type called numbers, and I'm having two variables. One is n and one is input. Then I'm going to ask the user by this message, how many numbers do you want to add? So we would like to first ask the user how many numbers that you would like to add. Then we're going to ask the numbers that the user would like to have. For example, I would say I would like to insert 3 numbers. And then the 3 numbers that I would like to insert are 5, 6, and 7. After that, we are going to take the numbers from the user and store them in a vector. And once this process has been done, then we are going to iterate over the vector to display the numbers that are stored in our vector. So I start by showing this message. How many numbers do you want to add? For example, I would say 3. Then we are going to take that number from the user, store it using cin in n variable. Then I'm having a for loop here, and my iterating variable is I, starting from 0, and it is going to continue as long as it is lower than n, and we are going to enter the loop as long as I is lower than n. Then in each iteration, we are showing this message to the user. Enter a number. Whatever the user is going to enter, we're going to use the cin syntax to store it in the input variable that we initialized above. Then, when it is stored in input variable, in the very same iteration, we are using the pushback function in vectors to insert this input variable into our numbers vector. Okay? And then when this process has been finished, we are going to show the vector by iterating through its elements. Here I'm having a for loop. My iterating variable is called num, and num is going to iterate over the vector numbers, and in each iteration we are going to show num in the output. So let me illustrate it with an example. For example, imagine that the user says that the user is going to enter 3 numbers, so n equals 3, and numbers for the iteration will be this one. So I equals 0, I equals 1, and I equals 2. So we are going to have 3 iterations here for this loop, okay, starting from 0 as long as I is lower than n equals 3. So I equals 0, I equals 1, and I equals 2 are the possible iteration numbers that our iterating variable I is going to take. Then in each iteration, for example, when I equals 0, we are going to ask the user enter a number, and the user, for example, is going to enter, for example, 5 in the first iteration. So we are going to take that 5 and store it in input. And then we are going to push back input to our vector, okay, to our vector. And our vector is numbers. To use the pushback function, we learned that we type down the name of our vector dot pushback. Then in parentheses, we type down the variable that we would like to be inserted to our vector. Therefore, our vector, the Therefore, our vector is having the value 5 in the after the first iteration. Okay, then I equals 1. We are going to, and the input is going to be 6, for example. The user is going to say, okay, the next number is 6. Then using again the pushback, we are pushbacking the variable input to our vector. Oops, this is I. And then in the last iteration, when I equals 2, user says that, for example, number 7, we are going to use the pushback for that variable. And then in each iteration, we are going to show the elements of the vector. So when, for example, in the first iteration, num equals 5, then num equals 6, then num equals 7. So let me run the code, and then we are going to analyze the code and validate our expectation here that we type down in comments. So when I run this code, I see this message. How many numbers do you want to add? So how many numbers do you want to add? So this part is being executed. And I would say 3, for example. And when I enter 3, it is going to be stored in the variable n. So I enter. It says enter a number. So I would like to say the first number that I want to have in my vector is number 5. It says, okay, so here we are now. Enter a number. We are going to iterate from I equals to 0 until it is lower than 3. Then in the first iteration, I entered 5. So 5 is stored in input, and input is pushed back to the numbers vector. And the next one, I would say 6. The next one, I would say 7. And when the 3 elements are finished, here we are having the loop that we are looping over the vector, and it is showing this message you entered, and then we're going to see out the value of the num variable, which is iterating variable in each iteration. So here it says you entered, this is this message, 5, 6, and 7. So 5, 6, and 7. This is exactly what we expected to see in the output. We could say, for example, I would like to enter 10 numbers, or like 5 numbers. For example, how many numbers do you want to enter? I would say 5. So it is going to ask me to enter 5 numbers, because now it is going to have the I equals to 0, and as long as I is lower than 5, so I equals 0, I equal 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we can enter 5 numbers. So first 10, then 20, then 30, 40, and 50. And then it is going to iterate over the vector and show everything in the output here, as you can see. So depending on how many numbers that I would like to enter, I would like to add in the initial choose here, we're going to enter larger or shorter numbers for our vector, and then we're going to show the output. For example, if I want to enter 10 numbers here, I mentioned 10, then it is going to, the program is going to ask us for 10 numbers to be entered. Then in the output, we are going to have, for example, 10 numbers to be printed in the output. Thank you for watching. Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we would like to write a program to calculate the sum of all numbers in a vector. We are having a vector of integer type called numbers. Then this vector is having 5 elements, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we are having a variable called sum. It's of integer data type, and it is initialized to 0. To have the calculation of sum of all numbers, we're going to iterate first over all the elements, and then each element is going to be added to this sum variable. For example, here I'm having a for loop. I'm having my iterating variable called num, and we're going to iterate through this numbers vector. In each iteration, this num is going to be added to the sum. So this equation here, sum plus equal num, is exactly as this equation. Sum equals sum plus num. Okay, So in the first, I would say like this, first iteration, sum equals 0 plus 1. Why? Because sum initialized to be 0 and num is the first element of the vector numbers because we are iterating over the elements of this vector, and in the first iteration we are going to have our iterating variable num equal to the first element of the vector. Therefore num equals 0, thus sum equals 1. Okay. In the second iteration, we are having sum equal 1 plus 2. Why? Why do we have that? Because we are having sum plus num. So sum plus num. Sum equals to 1 because in the first iteration we updated the value of sum, so it's not 0 anymore, it's 1. And why 2? Because the num is iterating for the second round through the numbers vector, and the second element of this vector equals 2, therefore sum equals 3. We have the third iteration, sum equals 3 plus 3. And the first 3 is the value of sum, which we computed in the last iteration as to be 3. And this 3 is the num, which is the element of the numbers vector, because it's the third iteration. We are going to take the third number. Therefore, sum equals 6. In the fourth iteration, we are having sum equal 6 plus 4, sum equals 10. Why 6 plus 4? Because the sum from previous iteration equals 6, and 4 is the fourth element of this vector. And finally, in the fifth iteration, we are having sum equal 10 plus 5. Therefore, sum equals 15. Why 10? 10 is the value of sum in the previous iteration, and 5 is the last element in the fifth iteration. So the fifth element of the vector called numbers. So we expect to have the sum of all numbers in this vector to be equal to 15. And finally, after the calculation is done in this for loop, we are going to show out the output. So we say this message in the output, the sum of numbers is, and then we print the sum variable. So when I run this code, we see this message. So the sum of the numbers is 15. So if I have, for example, this element to be 30, for example, when I run, we see the sum must be increased. So as you see, the sum is now 42. So depending on the elements of our vectors, the sum of all numbers in a vector, of course, is going to change. Thank you for watching. Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we would like to write a program to find the maximum number in a vector. To do that, I'm having a vector of integer type. It is called numbers, and it has 5 elements: 10, 25, 7, 30, and 18. So we can see that the maximum number in this vector is 30, but we want to find it using C++. So we would like to write a program that does the work for us, does the job for us. So we need to have one assumption. First, I would like to initialize a variable to be equal to the first number of this vector. And then we are going to iterate through all the elements of the vector and compare all the elements of the vector with this first element. We are going to say if the second element is larger than the first element, okay, take that number and insert it in my variable. Otherwise, keep this first element. We are going to then compare the third element with the first element, fourth element with the first element, and the fifth element with the first element. Therefore, we are going to understand which one is the largest one. If one element is larger than the first element, we're going to take that large element and insert it in our variable. So here is my max number variable. This is initialized to be equal to the first element of the numbers vector. Okay, so it is equal to 10, but we are going to change it. This is just an assumption. Then, in order to find the largest number in this vector, we are going to iterate through this vector. Using num iterating variable, we are going to iterate over the vector called numbers. And in each iteration, we are going to check if this num variable is larger than our max number. It means that in each iteration, so max number equals 10, okay, in the first iteration. And in the first iteration, num also equals 10, because num is going to take the first element, okay? First iteration. And now we are checking this if, sorry. We are saying if num is larger than max number. So num equals 10, max number equals, let me copy it and paste it here. Maybe it's a better place to have it. Okay. In the first iteration, we are going to check if num is larger than max number. So num equals 10, max number equals 10. So 10 is larger than 10? No. Because the answer is no, therefore this statement is not true for the first iteration. And then we are not going to insert this if condition to execute this part of the code. So we are going to go up and we are going for the second iteration. So second iteration. In the second iteration, we are having max equal to 10 because we didn't change it, but num equals to 25 because now it is iterating for the second time, so it is taking the second value. Then we are checking to see if num is larger than max number. So num is 25 and max number equals 10. So this statement is true because 25 is larger than 10. Therefore, because this statement is true, we are going to insert this if condition. And when we insert this if condition, we are going to replace the max number. So max number equals 10 and num equals 25. And we are going to assign this num to max number. So we are going to insert 25 to be assigned to max number. Okay. Because we are saying on the left hand side, we are typing down max number. On the right hand side, we are typing num. Therefore, this 25 is going to be assigned to max number. So now max number has been updated. Then we are going up for the third iteration, okay? Third iteration. So max number equals 25. We had it from the previous iteration, and num equals 7. So 7 is larger than 25. No, this statement is not true. Therefore, we are not going to enter this if condition. We go up back again and we are going for the fourth iteration. Here, max number equals 25 still. We didn't change it in the previous iteration. And num equals 30 now. So 30 is larger than 25. So this statement is true because 30 is larger than 25. So we are going to enter this condition again, and max number now is updated to be 30. Why? Because num is assigned to max number. So num is 30 and max number is 25. So 30 is assigned to max number. Therefore, max number is updated and now it is having the value 30. So we go up back again and we're going to iterate for the fifth time, and it's the last iteration because this vector only has 5 elements. Max number equals 30, num equals 18. So 18, is it larger than 30? No. Therefore, this statement is not true. We are not going to enter, sorry. I was using the wrong word. We are not going to enter this if condition. And we are not going to go back up again. So why? Because we are only having 5 elements in this vector and we iterated over all 5 elements. So this for loop is also finished. Now we are having the max number equal to the largest number in this vector with this solution method. Now we are going to show it in the output. So the largest number is, and then we are showing the max number variable in the output. We expect to see number 30. So number 30. This is how we can find the largest number in a vector. So we assign a variable to be equal to the first element of the vector, and then we are going to iterate through that vector and compare all the numbers, all the elements of that vector with our initialized variable. If they are equal, it's okay. If this first element is larger than other element, we are going to do nothing. But if one of the elements is larger than this initialized variable, we're going to assign that to be equal to our variable. So we're going to update our max number variable. Then in the end, we are going to have the largest number being assigned to our max number variable. Thank you for watching. Hello everyone, welcome back. So now we would like to write a program that declares a vector of a string and print the first two elements of it. So here we are having a vector of type string, and the name of the vector is my vector, and there are three elements in the vector. So this vector is having three index 0, 1, and 2. Index 0 is for the first element, index 1 is for the second element, and index 2 is for the third element. Now we would like to print two elements of it directly. So we can simply do it like the first name is, and we name the vector here. In the braces, we are going to write the index of the first element, which is 0. In C++, we start from 0. This one is 0, then 1 and 2, the indexes. The second one, we name the vector, and in the braces, we are going to simply put the index of the second name, which is Bob, whose index is 1. So basically, using this code, we can access the elements of this vector of a string. So the first name is Alice, the second name is Bob. So here we learned how to access each element of a vector. Thank you for watching. Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we would like to write a program to reverse the order of elements in a vector. Here I'm having a vector called numbers. It's of integer type. It has 5 elements, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we know about indexing in C++. They start from 0. So the first element index is 0, the second element is 1, and the last element is 4. Okay. First, I am iterating through this vector to just print the original vector. So I'm having an iterating variable called num. It is going to iterate through the numbers vector, and it is going to, in each iteration, it is going to print the elements of the vector. Then I'm going to next line using the endl, and after that I'm going to reverse the vector here, and this part is not necessary because we're having the endl already. And then I'm showing this message, the reversed vector colon. And in order to show the reversed version of this vector, we are going to have a for loop. I'm having one iterating variable called I. It's of integer type, and it is equal to numbers.size. So the size of this vector minus 1, as long as I is larger than or equal to 0. This loop is going to continue, and in each iteration we are decrementing one value from I. And in each iteration I type down the name of the vector. We are printing out the index of that I. So here, for example, numbers.size, it is equal to 5. Okay. And we would like to have I starting from 4 as long as I is larger than or equal to 0, and in each iteration we are going to decrease the value of I. Okay, in each iteration decrease the value of I by 1 unit. Okay, this is how we're going to do. So we are not going to have starting from 0 until the last element of the vector to iterate through it, we are going to start from the last element and get to the first element. This is how we're going to reverse this vector. But why we are having the numbers size -1? Why? Because here in each iteration we are having the ith element of that vector being printed. Okay, so this is the index of that vector element. So for example, if we are having, for example, numbers 0, so the name of the vector and then index 0, we're going to have number 1. Okay, if we are having, for example, 1, we are going to print number 2, etc. until end, and the last element of this vector is going to take the index 4 because we are having 5 elements and we start from 0. Okay, so the last element of this vector is having index 4, which is equal to 5. But the thing here is that, so the size of this vector equals to 5. So 5 here, if we are having I equals to 5, in the first iteration, we are going to ask for the numbers vector with the element of this numbers vector with the index 5, which does not exist here. We don't have the index 5. We are having only up until index 4. Therefore, it is going to return an error for us. This is why we need to have -1 when we are going to have a for loop to reverse a vector all the time, because in C++ we start the indexing from 0. This is why we are having the -1. And then, for example, here in the first iteration, we are going to print numbers and then index 4. In the next iteration, we are decreasing the I, so we are calling with the index 4, then index 2, then index 1, and finally index 0. Okay, so because it is going to continue as long as it is larger than or equal to 0. So in the first iteration, it is going to take 5 minus 1, I equals 4, therefore 5 minus 1. So it is going to print the last element of this vector, the fifth element, let's say, with the index 4 of this vector. So it is going to print 5 for us. Then when we go up, we are going to decrease the I value by 1 unit, and we are going to have I equals to 3. So then we are calling this vector and its element with the index 3. So index 3 is the fourth element, so we are going to the fourth element, but also it is equal to 4, and then it is going to call it, we are going to decrease the value of I one more round, so it is equal to 2. We are going to call the element of this numbers vector which has the index 2, which equals to the third element, and in this case we are having it equal to be 3 as well. Then the index 1, then we're calling the element with the index 1, and then finally with index 0. So this is how we are going to reverse a vector. Initially, we printed out the original vector, and then in order to reverse it, is instead of iterating from the start until the end, we are iterating from the end until the start. Okay, this is why we're decreasing the element of the value of I, which is the iterating variable in each iteration. So we start with the last element, which is the size of the vector -1. We explained why. Then we are going to print, for example, the last element. Then we are going to decrease the I value by 1, then 1 to the last, and then another variable. We're going to get closer to the start of the vector in each iteration. So how do we reverse the vector? We're starting to iterate through it from the end until the start, instead of the typical version of iterating through a vector which is going to start from the start until the end. So this is how we can do it in C++. Thank you for watching. Hello everyone. Welcome back. In today's video, we would like to write a program that prints the size of a vector. So we have a vector of integers. Its name is vector, my vector, and it is having 4 elements, 5, 10, 15, and 20. So we would like to display the size of the vector. To do that, we have the name of the vector dot size with empty parentheses, and we are printing the value. So let me just comment this part first. So when we run, we expect to see 4. Okay. So here, my vector dot size in empty parentheses, we will just print out the number of elements of a vector. And in order to do some review, we can use the name of the vector dot pushback, and within parentheses, the value of the value that we would like to be inserted in the vector. So now I would like to insert 100 to be a new element of this vector. So I use the pushback dot pushback, and in the parentheses I type down 100. So now if I run, we will see that the new vector size is 5. Why? Because one element is inserted to the original vector. So we learned how to compute the size of a vector. We reviewed how to push back one number to the vector. And again, we see that when a new number is pushed back to the vector, the size has increased from 4 to 5. Now, in order to print the new vector, we can have a new integer called num that iterates over my vector. Iterates simply over the vector, and we have the num here. We have one space, and then we have the handle. So basically, I defined a for loop. We first initialize, we declare one integer called num. It is going to iterate over the my vector vector. So it's a vector that the name of the vector is my vector. So it is iterating over all the elements, and it is printing the elements simply. And we expect to see this new number that is inserted in the vector in this print, because this is the original vector, but we modified it. So let's run. Okay, great. So now we see that the original vector was 5, 10, 15, 20 until here, and we inserted one number 100 here with the pushback syntax, and now we see that the new vector is having 5 elements in it, and the 100 is inserted as the 5th element. Thank you for watching. Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we would like to write a program to remove even numbers from a vector. How can we identify if a number is even or odd? So if a number is divided by 2 and the remainder of this division is equal to 0, the number is even. Otherwise, the number is odd. So if a number is divided by 2 and the remainder of this division is equal to 0, the number is even. For example, 10 divided by 2, the output is 5, but the remainder is 0. Therefore, 10 is an even number. Otherwise, the number is odd. For example, if we divide 9 by 2, there is an output. For example, 4 something. And then the remainder is not, in fact, equal to 0. Therefore, 9 is not an even number and it's an odd number. Now we would like to write a program to remove all the even numbers from a vector. Here I'm having a vector of integer type. It is called numbers. It has these elements, like 5 elements, or 6 elements, sorry, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, and 35. So we would like to remove even numbers. What are the even numbers in this vector? So 10 is an even number, 20 is an even number, and 30 is an even number as well. First, I print out in the terminal the original vector. So I'm iterating through all the elements using the num iterating variable over all the elements of this numbers vector, and I'm in each iteration we are printing out the element of this vector. So original vector is being printed out using this part of the code using a for loop. Then in order to remove the even numbers, we are declaring another vector called odd numbers. It's a vector and it's of integer type. Now, what we are going to do is the following. We iterate again through all the elements of the original vector, which is numbers. And in each iteration, we check if our iterating variable is divided by 2, its remainder is not equal to 0. If this statement is true, we're going to push back that element, that num, into our odd numbers vector. Let me illustrate it with another example. So here in the first iteration, num equals to 10. Okay. In the first iteration, we check 10 divided by 2, its remainder. What is that number? It's 0. So we are checking to see if it's not equal to 0. Therefore, when 10 is divided by 2, its remainder is equal to 0. So this statement is not true. So it's not going to enter this part. So it is going to go up and start the second iteration. So the second iteration, num equals to 15. So 15 divided by 2, its remainder is not equal to 0. Yes, this statement is true because it's an odd number. If this statement is true, enter this if condition, and then here push back that 15 into our odd numbers vector. So this odd number vector is going to have the number 15 now. Okay, odd numbers. Okay, this is our vector. So this is going to take the number 15 as its first element. We go up and we start the third iteration. So the third iteration, num equals to 20. If 20 is divided by 2, its remainder is not equal to 0. This statement is not true because when 20 is divided by 2, its remainder equals to 0. Therefore, this statement, when it's not true, it's not going to enter this part of the code and it's go up. It is going to go up to get ready for the fourth iteration. So in the fourth iteration, num equals 25. 25 divided by 2, its remainder is not equal to 0. This statement is true. Because this statement is true, it is going to take that 25 and use the pushback function to insert it in the odd numbers vector. So the second element is 25. We go up and get ready for the next iteration. So fifth iteration, num equals to 30. 30. If 30 is divided by 2, its remainder is not equal to 0. This is what this statement is saying. But this statement is not true because 30, when it is divided by 2, its remainder equals to 0. Therefore, we are not going to enter this if condition and get ready for the next iteration, which is our last iteration because we are only having 6 elements. So we are going to iterate 6 times. So in the next iteration, num equals 35. 35 divided by 2, its remainder is not equal to 0. This statement is true. We are going to enter this if condition, and that 35 is going to be pushed back to the odd numbers vector. So here is our vector. Now we created a vector called odd numbers. It is exactly equal to the numbers vector, but after the removal of the even number. So this is the numbers vector. When its even numbers are removed, it turns to this odd numbers vector. And finally, we are printing out the vector after removing the even numbers. So we are iterating using the num iterating variable, iterating through the odd numbers vector, and in each iteration we are printing out the element of this num numbers vector. So when I run this code, we see here their original vector being printed out here. So 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, exactly these elements are being printed out. But then here, when we are having another for loop to remove the even numbers. We are seeing that vector after removing. Here this message is being shown. This part is the creation of odd numbers vector. Here is the message shown in the output saying that the vector after removing even numbers equal to 15, 25, and 35. Exactly the things that we expected. So this is how we can create a vector of another vector and remove the even numbers. We could remove odd numbers, for example. This could be another coding exercise. And in order to do that, instead of having this sign, we need to have this sign. So if, for example, a number is divided by 2, its remainder, the remainder of this division equals to 0, push back that number into our, for example, even numbers vector. This is how we could address another example. Thank you for watching. Hello everyone, welcome back. Now we would like to write a program that declares a vector and modifies the second element of it. Okay, so we would like to write a program that declares a vector and modifies the second element of it. So we have a vector of integer type. The name of the vector is numbers and it has 3 values. So we would like to modify the vector called numbers and the element that has the index of 1. We know that the index of 1 is for the second element because for the first element the index is 0. So we are putting 10 to be the second element of the vector numbers. And now we are displaying the updated vector using a for loop. Here we are printing the num. Let me run. Okay, great. So basically we see here the original vector was 1, 2, 3. Then we modified one element and now we are having 1, 10, 3 as to be the new and updated vector. So this is how we can modify elements of an array directly. We could modify also the third element or the first element. It depends on what we want to do, but this is how we can basically use a syntax to do that. Thank you for watching. So before we dive into vectors, we just need to remind that we need to include the header vector in the top of our code before we can use vectors. Okay, so we would like to write a program that declares a vector and assign 3 values to it. Okay, we would like to write a program that declares a vector and assigns 3 values to it. So in order to initialize and declare a vector, so here we use the keyword vector, and here we are mentioning the type of the vector, and then here it's the name of the vector. So it's a vector named number of type integer. If we wanted it to be float, we could say float. If we wanted to be double, we could say double. But here in this example, we are saying that it's a vector of integers and the name is numbers. In order to add some values afterwards, after the vector is initialized, in order to add some values to the vector, we can simply put the name of the vector, and then we have dot, and then we have the keyword pushback. When we use the pushback in the parentheses, we just type the value that we would like to be inserted to that vector. Therefore, here we are inserting value 10, and then we are naming the vector again, then the dot, then the pushback, and then in the parentheses, the value of the number that we would like to be inserted, and also 30. So after that, we use a for loop to print the vector for us. So we write down a for loop and we are counting the elements of this number. So this is the name of the vector that is here, and for this for loop we are simply initializing one integer called num, and this num is going to loop over all the elements of this vector using this syntax in the parentheses. And then in every iteration, it is going to print none. So if I run the code here, we will see that the elements in the vector are 10, 20, and 30. So these three values are inserted and are indeed printed. So this is how we can declare a vector and push back some values to vectors. In the next sessions, we're going to do some further coding exercises in this regard. Hello everyone. So we would like to write a program that removes the last element of a vector. We have a vector of type integer called numbers, and there are three elements 100, 200, and 300. In order to remove the last element, we can use the name of the vector dot pop back, that this in empty parentheses, and this syntax is going to remove the last element of the vector, which is 300 here. And then we are going to display the vector again here. Let me run. Okay, so we see that the vector after removing the last element is 100 and 200. So now 300 has been removed. So if we would like to add like push back like 10 numbers dot push back 12. So now we are push backing two numbers to the vector, and basically let me show the message. After adding two numbers, and here also we are having this. So basically we had the code until here, we analyzed it. So it is going to, using this line, it is going to remove the last element, and we're going to display the updated vector that was 100 and 200, we saw it. Now I'm going to add two more numbers to the vector. So after 200, now we expect to have 10 and 12. So it will, and then we are showing the vector. So after 200, we need to have two new elements. Okay, so vector after removing the last element is 100 and 200. And after adding two numbers, now the vector is having the size of 4. So 100, 200, 10, and 12 using pushback here. So this is exactly the flexibility that I was talking about in the beginning of this section. In arrays, we cannot have this flexibility. When the size is declared, it is declared and it is going to be fixed. We cannot modify it. However, we can see that in here in vectors, we can modify the size easily. We can extend it, we can reduce the size, etc. So this is a very good exercise of vectors that give us this flexibility. Thank you for watching. Hello everyone, welcome back. Now we would like to write a program that clears a vector. In order to clear a vector, we first need to declare a vector. So we have a vector of integer, it's called numbers, and it's 7, 14, and 25. So there are three elements in it. In order to clean a vector, we simply are going to use one function that is called clear. Using a clear numbers, which is the name of the vector, dot clear in empty parentheses, we're going to remove all the elements of the vector. And when we run, we see that the numbers dot size, so we are the function to give us the size of the vector, when we type it down, it says that there are 0 elements in the vector. So this is how vectors are, this is how much vectors are flexible, and we as you see here, we removed everything in the vector and the size is reduced to 0. This is the flexibility of vectors that we don't have them in arrays. Hello everyone, welcome to another coding exercise session. We would like to write a program that reads the favorite color of a user and it display them. So we are for that, because colors, there are names and there's a sequence of letters and characters. We need to have a string. To do that, we have a vector of type string colors that is named colors, and we have a string named color and we have an integer that is n. So we first ask the user to tell us how many favorite colors do you have, and for example the user says 2, 3, etc. We are going to store it in here using cin function, and then we are going to ask the user one by one to give us the color that you would like to insert. So we are asking it to enter your favorite color, and we have a for loop starting from 0 until I is lower than n, and whatever the user is mentioning, we are saving it, storing it using the get line syntax to the color, and which is a string, and this color is now pushed back to the vector colors, okay, every time. So if initially it says that I have 3 favorite colors, it is going to iterate 3 times, and then when it iterates 3 times, each time it is asking enter your favorite color. You say, for example, green, then another one blue, then another one red, and these colors are one by one added to this vector. And then we are simply just printing all the elements. We are having a for loop going through all the elements of the colors vector, and we are printing them. So let me just print also endl here. So imagine that it says how many colors, how many favorite colors do you have? I say 2, enter, and then it is asking now enter your favorite color. So when I have 2, I is going to get values 0 and I equals 1. Okay, so now I say green, and then I say blue. So when I say green, green is pushed back to the colors vector, and then I enter, and then blue, I enter blue. So blue is now pushed back to the colors vector, and then we are displaying your favorite colors are, and we are going through all the elements. We're iterating over all the elements of the colors vector, and we are printing them. This is very simple, but we learned and we reviewed how to push back, how to read strings from the user, and how to print strings from a vector of type string in this example. Thank you for watching. Hello everyone, we would like to write a program that allows the user to input numbers into a vector and check if a specific number exists in the vector or not. So for that we have a vector of type integer, its name is numbers, and we have one integer called num and one is the search num. So we ask the user enter the numbers, and we define a while loop here, and as long as it's an infinite while loop, because we have the condition here true. So it's when the condition in the parentheses is true, it means that it's an infinite while loop, and we are going to iteratively get the number, the input from the user, and push back that number into the numbers vector until the user enters -1. If the user enters -1, it means that I'm not going to enter anything more, so break and get out of this while loop. Okay, so it's an infinite loop that we need to break to get out of it. In order to understand when to break, we allow the user enter numbers and type -1 to stop. So the user will stop. So the program, this while loop, infinite while loop, will stop when the user is going to enter -1. Then when the user finished entering all the numbers, the user is going to enter -1. So we get out of this while loop, and we are going to have a vector called numbers, and there are certain numbers in that vector. It's done. So then we are asking a user to give us another number to search and see if the new number that the user is entering exists already in the vector that we formed previously in the previous step. So the user is going to enter one integer number, for example, here, and we're going to store it in the search num. And to check to see if this number exists in the vector or not, we need a for loop. But before that, we have a found boolean initialized by default to be false. We have a for loop. Iteratively, we are going through all the elements of the numbers vector, and we say if in each iteration n is going to iterate over all the elements. So if n at some point equals to this entered number from the user, the key number, the search number, just put the found equal to be true, which was initially false, and then do the break and come out of this for loop. Okay. And finally, we say if found is true, when we have the boolean in the parentheses, it basically by default it means it is equal to 1. So if found is true, meaning that if we enter this for loop, if we enter this if conditions, if found is true, display exists in the list, otherwise display that it does not exist. So let me run the code and we go and analyze the code one more time. It says enter numbers. I would say 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. You see, it is an infinite loop. Until I'm entering the number, it is going to take numbers. As long as I'm entering numbers, it's okay. But once I push -1, it gets out of the loop. Exactly like we had it here. So when it is -1, then it is going to get out of this while loop. We were in this while loop so far. Then it says enter a number to search. So I would say 7. It says 7 exists in the list. Why it is exist? Because it checks all the elements, and at some point one of the elements, that is n, equals to this search num, which is 7, and at that point it is going to set true for the found boolean and break. So get out of this for loop, and it says if found equals true, in this case print exists in the list. So let me run one more time, and it says okay, 1, 2, 3, and I say -1. So enter number 5. It says 5 does not exist in the list. So basically what it does here, we are storing all the elements from we are reading and storing all the elements from the user, and when the user says -1, we are getting out of this for loop. When we get out of this for loop, we ask the user to enter a search number. So we have 5 here, we are looking for 5, and the elements of the vectors are 1, 2, 3. And we set the boolean, the found boolean, to be equal to false by default, and it says iterate over all the elements of the vector, which are 1, 2, and 3. And if each of these elements 1, 2, and 3 equal to 5 while iterating, set the true for the found boolean and break. Otherwise, do nothing, just we leave it to be false. And in the end, if this found is true, you're going to see the message exists in the list. But here it says does not exist in the list. You see, this means that 5 does not exist. Search num, which is 5, does not exist in the list. Why? Because found is not true. And found is not true because 5 is not equal to any of the elements of the vector that are 1, 2, and 3. Therefore, it is going to stay to be false until the end. So it was a very practical example to review some stuff from before, from the beginner course, and also to know how to read the elements of a vector from the user and how to comparatively check one number with the elements of an array. Thank you for watching.